CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories.
We have kept 1.5 alive.
The COP26 summit in Glasgow reaches a global deal on climate, but there are big compromises on coal. 68 inmates die in fighting at a prison in Ecuador. The police say it was a power struggle between drugs trafficking gangs. Protests as the Netherlands becomes the first Western European country to go into partial lockdown since summer amid record COVID infections. And the growing plight of thousands of migrants at the Poland-Belarus border. Russia's President Putin says he's ready to help. World leaders have finally reached an historic climate change deal following a turbulent 2 weeks of talks in Glasgow. For the first time, a United Nations agreement explicitly binds countries to reduce coal, the worst fossil fuel for greenhouse gases. But last-minute compromises on the wording of that coal agreement almost brought the COP president to tears, and many are warning the Glasgow deal doesn't go far enough. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Naweed Jabarkal in Scotland. Naweed, what has been agreed in Glasgow?
Well, in the next hour or so, Jamie, we're expecting to hear from that COP26 President Alok Sharma, as well as the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson in a scheduled press conference, no doubt singing the praises of how this event has gone. It was a long, tiresome couple of weeks, but finally there was agreement at the end. And that agreement almost scuppered at the last minute some late drama where some countries, major players at the summit, said they weren't too happy with the use of the language around phasing out the use of coal. But the press conference, no doubt they'll also be saying that there should be some realism here and paring back expectations with the caveat that even though these pledges have been agreed, if you look at what the scientists say, it's still not going to be enough currently to stop global warming this century, to limiting it to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was the main aim of this. There will also be lots of countries and parties that won't be too happy with what's come out of this, but at the end of the day, it's all a matter of compromise.
It's ran into extra time, with negotiations going to the wire. But nearly 2 weeks after the COP26 climate summit began, a deal's been reached to try and limit the effects of global warming.
The great news is, together, the world has made some important breakthroughs. We've kept alive the hope of restricting the growth in temperatures to 1.5 degrees. And we've made huge progress on coal, cars, cash and trees. For the first time ever, we've got over 190 countries all agreeing to sound the death knell for coal power.
Shortly before the final vote, a breakaway meeting took place between the US, EU, China and India as the Asian countries pushed for softer language around the phasing out of coal. As two major but still developing economies, both will rely on fossil fuels for some time yet. Finance was another major issue. Poorer nations want more help from richer ones to deal with both current and future effects of rising temperatures.
COP26 has turned a new page in the global effort to address climate change, but it's also an imperfect COP. Developed countries need to help developing countries strengthen their capabilities to address climate change so that countries can work together to address the climate crisis.
Many states are leaving here bitterly disappointed, especially those low-lying nations or islands that are most at risk.
We are describing this COP as an abject failure because it hasn't been able to rise to the occasion of dealing with loss and damage. It doesn't matter what else they do. That was our issue. The poor countries, the vulnerable countries came here for that, and they've been slapped in the face by the presidency.
The deal's been welcomed by many campaign groups, but activists say it doesn't go far enough. Even with the pledges made here, scientists think the world's still on course to miss the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Now, despite those concerns, what has been agreed here in Scotland is historic. Make no mistake about that. For example, it's the first time that the UN climate deal has specifically targeted fossil fuels. There will be many parties that leave unhappy, but realistically, no deal would have satisfied all of the players involved here. The key goal of the summit was, of course, to try and get the world working together on reducing emissions. And if you look at that, then there was consensus reached there. But speaking to some of the delegates afterwards, judging the mood, it looks like there's a lot more work still left to do. Jamie.
Naweed, as you say, lots of unfinished business, much more work to be done. What happens next? Talk us through the process.
Yeah, one of the biggest concerns among the poorer nations or those most at risk from climate change is how do we trust the bigger players that they're going to deliver climate finance if they've broken pledges in the past, for example, or they say they need immediate help now, much more of it. That wasn't covered entirely in this deal. They wanted funding to be doubled from 2025, for example, but that wasn't included. If you look at some countries in Africa, they spend up to 10% of their GDP every single year already trying to deal with the issues of adapting and mitigating the effects of climate change. That's what they're going to be pushing for moving forward. COP27 already, that was being brandished about a lot. That will be in Egypt next year. COP28 will be in the United Arab Emirates afterwards. And so what a lot of these countries are looking to do is to try and push their interests moving forward. But what COP26 has offered is a platform for the world to try and look to work together on an issue that will affect us all.
Naweed Jabarkal in Scotland, thank you very much. At least 68 inmates have been killed in a prison riot in Ecuador during clashes between rival drugs trafficking gangs. Dozens were injured in the violence, which started on Friday in the jail in Guayaquil. Gang-related violence in the same prison in September left more than 100 inmates dead. Some had been decapitated. Families of the prisoners are waiting anxiously for word of their loved ones.
I'm hoping that my son is one of the injured, but we don't know anything because there is no official list from the authorities, only a list that has been leaked, but we don't know anything.
Nothing is known. What the prisoners are saying from inside is that no police or military are in control, and they are letting them kill each other in cold blood.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin says Moscow is ready to help resolve the migrant crisis at the border between Belarus and Poland. Speaking on his weekly program on state television, he accused the West of trying to deflect blame over the situation. Julia Chapman reports now from Moscow.
Responding to accusations that Russia is somehow masterminding this crisis, President Vladimir Putin said he only heard about the situation from the media and insisted that he hadn't even spoken to Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko about this issue before this past week when the two spoke on the phone twice. President Putin also said that the West was trying to absolve itself of guilt over this situation by pointing the finger at Russia, but he did offer to help alleviate the crisis in any way that Moscow can. And the crisis is certainly building as the situation continues to be very difficult on the border with Belarus and Poland for the thousands of migrants that are camped out there in temperatures that are reaching below 0 degrees Celsius overnight. More than 10 migrants are confirmed to have died so far, and that number could be higher. It isn't known because most aid groups can't get anywhere near the people who are struggling to survive there. Some aid is being distributed by the Belarusian authorities, but certainly there are fears for the health and safety of those who are camped out there. And many of them are still trying to break through the border despite the heavy fortification on the Polish side. Polish border officials say some 50 migrants broke through on Saturday out of about 223 attempts, and they've confirmed that 22 Iraqi citizens have been arrested. The fate of the rest of those people is unknown. On Monday, the EU foreign ministers are expected to approve an extension, a widening of sanctions against Belarus, which is believed to extend to aviation companies, airlines and travel agencies that might be facilitating the movement of people into Belarus and towards the Polish border. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
The son of the former Libyan ruler Colonel Gaddafi is to run for president in December. A video has been released showing Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi signing registration documents in the town of Sebha. It's the first time he's been seen in public in a decade. Tunisian police have clashed with protesters as they marched on parliament, demonstrating against the president's seizure of powers. Hundreds of police blocked an area in the capital, Tunis, where thousands of protesters were gathering. President Kais Saied suspended parliament and dismissed the government 4 months ago, moves his critics say amounted to a coup. Bulgarians are voting in the country's third parliamentary election this year, as well as a presidential election. The incumbent president, Rumen Radev, is widely expected to be re-elected. But the parliamentary vote looks uncertain once again. The former Prime Minister, Boyko Borisov's centre-right party, leads the opinion polls, but without enough backing for an overall working majority. 2 powerful earthquakes have struck southern Iran near the port of Bandar Abbas, forcing people to flee their homes. State television says 1 person died when an electricity pole fell on him. The tremors were felt across the Gulf in the United Arab Emirates. Millions of unvaccinated people are being told to stay at home in Austria after new lockdown rules were approved. From Monday, anyone who hasn't had a jab must remain indoors, apart from essential travel such as going to work or buying food. The Chancellor, Alexander Schallenberg, says the measures are needed to ease pressure on hospitals as cases increase. Austria has one of the lowest take-ups of vaccinations in Western Europe. There have been protests in the Netherlands as it becomes the first Western European country to impose a partial lockdown since the summer amid record coronavirus infections. Restrictions will be enforced for 3 weeks, with bars, shops and restaurants closing early. Stefan de Vries reports now from Amsterdam.
Well, in general, the restaurants and bars respected the new lockdown at 8 o'clock, but in some cities in the south and in north and Leeuwarden, there were riots. Bars stayed open, so there were incidents with the riot police, but in general, the new restrictions were respected throughout the country. Shops have to close between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. and bars and restaurants between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. So that's a new a reaction to the sudden rise of COVID-19 infections in the Netherlands, which took the Dutch government a little bit by surprise and forced the Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, to announce these new restrictions.
The outbreak management team advised us to limit the amount of social contacts to the smallest possible terms and therefore to reduce the amount of infections in a big crackdown for a few weeks, and a very wide-reaching one, because the virus is everywhere, in the whole country and among all age groups.
There is a general fatigue within amongst the Dutch citizens, because only 6 weeks ago the Dutch government announced that all corona measures could be lifted, that we could go back to normal as before the pandemic. But then only 6 weeks later, the number of infections rose to 16,000 per day in a country of 18 million people. It's the highest number of infections in the European Union. So the government was taken by surprise, and it's exactly this changing of rules every couple of weeks that's making the Dutch citizens a little bit, fed up with the Dutch government. At the same time, the protesters are a minority. It's a small group of people that protest every time the government announces something. In general, the restrictions are widely accepted by the Dutch, but at the same time, people also get tired of all these new restrictions. Now these new restrictions will last for 3 weeks until December the 3rd, and then the government will assess whether the situation is safe enough to lift the restrictions that were put in place last night. But indeed, the Dutch are a little bit tired, and I think I can say that in general for a lot of people around the world, they all want to get on with their normal lives, but unfortunately these restrictions are apparently still necessary to fight the pandemic.
Our correspondent Stefan de Vries reporting from Amsterdam. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China's big push to vaccinate millions of children against coronavirus by the end of this year.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN. Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. The COP26 summit in Glasgow reaches a global deal on climate, but there are big compromises on coal. Our other headlines, 68 inmates die in fighting at a prison in Ecuador. The police say it was a power struggle between drug trafficking gangs. And protests as the Netherlands becomes the first Western European country to go into partial lockdown since summer amid record coronavirus infections. More than 84 million Chinese children between the ages of 3 and 11 have been vaccinated against COVID-19. The National Health Commission says all children without medical conditions should be vaccinated by the end of the year. CGTN's correspondent Yu Li visited a children's vaccination centre in Beijing.
Toddlers from nearby kindergartens are here taking their first COVID-19 jabs at Xueyuan Road Community Service Center.
说给他奖励，他喜欢奥特曼卡片，然后爸爸给他准备好了，然后说他今天勇敢的打针，回去给他奖励。
我们说这打疫苗能防病毒，他说就愿意来。
But more brave children means heavier workload for medical workers.
孩子比较多，约了1500，我个人大概得打200多个人。
There are those who are concerned about possible risks of vaccinating children, but more and more parents are now willing to do it.
其实有点就是怕这么小孩子打这疫苗会不会有什么其他的反应，但是呢，因为我们家是2个宝宝，然后我们第一个老大他2年级已经打完了，然后各方面都还挺好的，所以呢，我们也就挺放心的了。
没什么担心，因为我身边的这些同事啊、朋友，他们的孩子也都打了，也都没有什么问题。
This is just one of the many sites for children to get vaccinated against COVID. At the same time, adults are taking booster shots. Yu Li, CGTN, Beijing.
An investigation has been launched after the FBI's email system was hacked. Thousands of messages were sent out claiming to be from the US Department of Homeland Security, warning of a possible cyber attack. The email said recipients could be targeted by an extortion group known as the Dark Overlord. The FBI says the affected hardware was taken offline. Britain's Queen Elizabeth has missed the country's Remembrance Sunday service after spraining her back. Buckingham Palace says the 95-year-old monarch was disappointed not to attend the event at the Cenotaph in London. Other members of the royal family and senior politicians were at the service to honour the country's war dead. The former Japanese princess, Mako Komuro, has left the country to live in the United States. She gave up her royal title and privileges last month to marry her commoner boyfriend. She'll now work at a Manhattan law firm. The marriage ignited a public debate in Japan about gender roles and media coverage of the royal family. Delhi is closing schools and construction sites after a severe pollution warning. The burning of crop waste in farmland around the Indian capital is said to have caused thick smog over the city. Government offices will also close and staff will work from home for the next week, while private employers have been urged to do the same. This summer's floods in Germany highlighted the urgency of slowing climate change and adapting to extreme weather. 2 decades ago, parts of eastern Germany were devastated by historic flooding, forcing the state of Saxony to invest in new infrastructure. Natalie Carney reports from the state capital, Dresden.
Fixed to the side of the Augustus Bridge, the oldest in Dresden, is a measurement stick that carefully displays the height of the Elbe River. In 2002, water levels reached historic heights here, causing immense damage to the city and forcing tens of thousands of residents to evacuate. The state of Saxony quickly allocated $1.5 billion towards developing 47 flood protection schemes, including expanding floodplains along the Elbe River, reinforcing levees, and building reservoirs. Dresden, the state's capital, received around $16 million to build a 3.5-kilometer protection wall and mobile barriers around the city to keep the Elbe out.
This is the old town of Dresden. It has cultural monuments of great value. We've incorporated existing structures into the defenses, including the city's former fortress. We've added marble and sandstone. We're also able to bring in other defenses in the event of a flood.
But with some 400 waterways in and around Dresden, the Elbe is not its only threat.
Dresden is surrounded by waterways, so it needs these large-scale flood protection projects, but also smaller ones working in harmony to keep the city safe.
With such vulnerability, well over 200 anti-flood protection projects have been established around Dresden, such as the one at a park along its smaller Kaitzbach River.
In 2002, we realized that the city was becoming increasingly vulnerable to flooding. That's why we've taken this opportunity. We've lowered the ground level of a park, creating capacity for around 20,000 cubic meters and to hold back a lot of the water if necessary.
This retention area acts as a sponge to collect and absorb any overflow water from the Kaitzbach River. These flood protection projects were completed in 2011, just in time for another flooding event in 2013. This time, the city was prepared and saved millions in potential damages. While some have criticized these methods for eating up farmland and lucrative landscape, local officials believe spending the money on protective measures now will save them billions in the future.
In these times of climate change, when things are changing so quickly, it's very important to keep moving and to keep thinking about what we can do. We have to adapt to these changing conditions.
Natalie Carney, CGTN, Dresden, Germany.
Peru's flourishing reputation for food has helped it become one of the top culinary destinations in the world. As tourism recovers from the pandemic, visitors are slowly returning. Lima is increasingly touted as the destination for restaurants and the best chefs. CGTN's Dan Collins reports.
Peruvian food is famous for its variety, original flavors and colorful presentation. Despite the strain and uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, this year did bring some welcome news for the country's top eateries. Pia Leon, creator and head chef of restaurant Koye, was the winner of the 2021 Best Female Chef Award.
There is definitely more pressure, there is more responsibility because they make you more visible and a reference point for people who are beginning in the world of gastronomy.
She now has her own restaurant, Koye, on the second floor of the same building where her husband, Virgilio Martinez, has his award-winning restaurant, Central. They met when she began working there as a chef. Central was named the 4th best restaurant in the world in 2021 and the best in South America in a survey from the UK. But both eateries focus 100% on Peruvian food. For Leon, being able to reopen the restaurant has meant a respite from the pandemic.
There was a lot of uncertainty. We are not out of it yet, but we are moving forward and we've stayed afloat.
The pandemic has also given them the chance to reflect on the mission and identities of their two restaurants.
We share the same work philosophy, which is to show Peru's biodiversity, the products we find on the coast, in the mountains and in the Amazon. That's the common goal.
Pia Leon and Virgilio Martinez are not the only young chefs putting Peru on a plate with new, bold and modern concepts.
If Peru's cuisine shows its rich biodiversity, it's also a reflection of the country's cultural diversity and the waves of immigrants who came here from Europe to Asia over the years. You can find a taste of that here in the restaurant Maido.
The restaurant fuses Asian and Peruvian cuisine with a twist.
Hello everybody, my name is Mitsuharu Tsumura. Most people call me Micha. I am from Lima, Peru, and we are here in my restaurant Maido.
Maido came in 7th place on the world's 50 best restaurants list this year and has been a fixture in the top 50 for a decade, holding Latin America's top slot several times. For Tsumura, Peruvian cuisine is an open book, influenced by waves of immigration from countries as far apart as Italy and China.
That is the fun part of Peru, that we don't reject other cultures, or we don't let them grow or let them stay by themselves, but we embrace them.
While tourists are drawn to Peru's archaeological sites and natural wonders, it's perhaps their food which Peruvians take the most pride in. Dan Collins, CGTN, Lima.
The headlines again. The COP26 summit in Glasgow reaches a global deal on climate, but there are big compromises on coal. 68 inmates die in fighting at a prison in Ecuador. The police say it was a power struggle between drugs trafficking gangs. And protests as the Netherlands becomes the first Western European country to go into partial lockdown since summer amid record coronavirus infections. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview. More news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's Razor. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.